Howdy! We're going to go into Dreamweaver and we're going to do some kerning, leading, and tracking with CSS. And whether you're developing websites or just doing print work, kerning, leading, and tracking is something that we all should know about because you can do it in Word, Photoshop, Illustrator, Quark, any application. Even maybe text edit uses kerning, leading, and tracking. And when it comes down to getting down and dirty with your text and fitting text exactly where you want it to go, this is very handy. In fact, some people call kerning, leading, and tracking the Holy Trinity of Text. So let's start out with something that really makes sense. And that's leading. And leading is the space between lines. 100 years ago, yes, they had newspapers and newsletters 100 years ago. And believe it or not, to put together those newspapers, they would have people. And these people, all of these little, the T, the E, and the X, they were all little separate little metal pieces of text in different fonts. Can you believe that? Okay. So what they would do is they would get a bar of lead right here, and they would put the T on the bar of lead, the E on the bar of lead, etc., 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 etc. Then they would get another bar of lead, put the text on there, another bar of lead, thus the term leading. And the thicker the bar, the more space between lines. Look, see, skinnier bar, that is leading. Now, tracking. Tracking is the space between all selected letters. Now, we have this text up here. It's the same text down here, but we've applied tracking to the space between these letters. They all come together. And we have this text here. This line of text down here is the same text, but we just spread the space between letters apart. But this final line, notice selected letters. If we just select these letters right here, we can bring them closer together. Thus, tracking is the space between selected letters. And then there's kerning. Kerning, leading, and tracking, the Holy Trinity of Text. Kerning is the space between two letters. Here we have my, and we've all run into it. You're doing something really important. Your document is really exciting. And then you go to do the title, and you get some weird stuff coming up between the X and the J up top. And it's like, what's up with that? So what you do is you select two letters, and you either spread them apart or bring them closer together. That's kerning. Now, in the land of CSS, they don't actually use those terms. But for you print people coming to web, you'll really enjoy this because you guys are all control freaks. So in CSS, leading is referred to the space between lines. They just make it sense in modern era. They call it line height. And you give it some value, some pixel value, an M value, maybe a whatever value you want to plug in. That would be your line height. Is like your bar of lead. And so here I'm using a class. It's called my text box. And then anything in the text box is going to have this line height. That is CSS leading. And I have sample files for this, and we're going to go into Dreamweaver in a second. Then there's CSS tracking. CSS tracking, the space between letters. Wow, this makes sense. Letter spacing. And then the value would be here, the space between letters. And you can do this in any box. or you can apply it to words through the span methodology, which we'll do in Dreamweaver. So there you go. There's tracking, but CSS goes beyond regular letter spacing. CSS actually gives you the option to do tracking with words, or they call it word dash spacing value. That's kind of handy. I bet you control freaks love that. And then finally, kerning with CSS. CSS with kerning, well, it's still letter spacing, but you just kind of signify what two letters you want to space, and we're going to do that in a second. Now, you can download these sample files at sillybilly.com/samples/text.zip. Unless you're in my Udemy class, then they're readily available in the samples file there. So here we go. Let's go into Dreamweaver. Woo! And I've got some lovely lorem ipsum right here. I tell you, I went to loremipsum.com and I just made that a snippet. I've got like 4 paragraphs. I can just use it as a snippet, pull it out and stick it in here. Comes in very handy. And I've got my handy dandy designer panel open. So because I'm lazy, I made an internal embedded style sheet. You can see my styles right here. And you can see I have 4 classes or boxes. I've got a box for all of my text. I've got a box for my title. These black words are in a box called my story. And then, believe it or not, the L and the O in lorem are in a class called my kerning. And if I go in and if I look at my code, you can see my embedded style sheet up here. Text box with a width and height, little margin left so you can see it better on this screen. Brought it down a little bit. I've applied Helvetica font with a font size, blah, blah. Notice my kerning has nothing applied to it. Down here in my body tag, I use my text box. I open it here, close it down here. Notice how handy this comment tag is, my HTML comment, to let me know what I'm closing when. For my title up top, For my title, I have it in the my title class. My story, the black text, is in the my story class. Now, for kerning, I just made a span, and a span is like duct tape for HTML. You can, if you don't want to make a whole box like an ID or a div, then you make a class, call it span, and then in the span class, then you apply your class. And notice I'm just applying this class to these two letters, and then I close the span. I'm done with that. Span class, name of the class, apply it, and then close the span. So here we go. Let's experiment with it and play around a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to click up here so I can see all my styles down here. And I don't want to apply my leading or line spacing to everything in my box, just my story. So I can click on my story. I come up here, click the little T in the CSS Designer panel, and now I'm going to go to line height. Here we go. And I'm going to set that to pixels. Ooh, wow, it took it to 0 by default, but just for the heck of it, I'm going to take that to 20. There you go. That spreads them out a bit more. Let's take it to 40. What the heck? Woo! There, wow, my God, math made easy. 30. Well, that looks presentable. And what if I want to go to some tracking, letter spacing in here? So I'm going to take this to pixels. Ooh, it went to 0. And then let's space this out. Oh my, that looks good. That looks like one of those New York Times jigsaw puzzles. And let's bring them back together a bit. Oh, that's looking much better. I like that. Don't you like that? You got to like that. So, so you can see letter spacing. And you can see, apparently, if you have a pixel value that you're ready to work with. Now, that's not quite to my liking, but it's good enough. That would be tracking. Now, up here, this is my title, and my kerning, which is only applied to the L and the O. Now, they don't really have a term for kerning in CSS. All it is a letter spacing. So I can go to my kerning, and in my code, I have LO wrapped in this span class my kerning. I'll go back into design mode, deselect that, select, I have to click on my style thing so I can see kerning. Come up here, go to the little T in designer mode, and let's go to letter spacing. We'll go to pixels, and I'll put in some terrible value just to exaggerate. There you go. Now, I must have needed to close my span sooner because notice the effect from here to there. But that is the space between two letters. Now, something that we didn't do, and let's do this. Let's take that down to 2 and see what happens. Woo, bring it back in. Let's take it to 1. 1. Oh, let's take it to 0. What the heck? We're just messing around. Okay, it'll bring them closer and closer. But there you go. Letting, tracking, and kerning in CSS.